Summer, 1940. RAF Hornchurch, Essex. The concrete still holds the night's chill, as two Supermarine Spitfires sit nose to windpaint, dulled by salt air and sleepless sorties. Same Merlin engine humming under cowling. Same 8303 Brownings tucked into the wings. Same pilot strapping in Squadron Leader Desmond Cook chinstrap, snug gloves, creaking eyes narrowed to the thin distance where the channel begins. He advances the throttle on the first aircraft, and the Spitfire leaps forward, tail lightning wheels skimming. Liftoff after roughly 320 yards. The climb winds on like a hard-earned hymn. 10,000 feet. 15. 20,000 in 11 minutes and 8 seconds. The ceiling comes where air thins and engines gasp, just above 32,000 feet, near the margin RAF planners have learned to respect and to fear. 20 minutes later, Cook straps into the second Spitfire identical airframe, identical Merlin, but a different propeller system glinting at the hub. Again, the throttle slides forward, but this time, the takeoff roll feels shorter, about 225 yards, and the nose lifts with a confidence that is almost insolent. The altimeter ticks upward, faster, steadier. 10,000. 15. 20,000 in 7 minutes and 42 seconds. Up and up still, the thin blue deepening the cockpit breath, frosting at the edges, as he reaches a service ceiling near 36,500 feet, thousands higher than before a summit that changes tactics timing and the odds of coming home alive. Same plane, same engine, same pilot. Only 3 spinning aluminum blades governed to hold the Merlin at its happiest revolutions, fine on the run, coarser, in the thin air, separate the ordinary from the extraordinary. The difference tastes like time 2.5 minutes saved in the climb is the difference between meeting bombers over Kent and meeting wreckage in London. It feels like altitude a few thousand feet more turns a defensive scramble into an attack from above. On the ground, armorers pretend not to watch. The rigger dusts his hands on a rag and lets out the breath he was keeping. Up in the circuit, Cook brings the Spitfire around, and even from far off, the note of the Merlin is changed, less strained, more certain, like a voice that has finally found its key. Across the field, the windsock flicks east, and with it a thought. If 3 blades can do this to a single fighter on a summer morning, what might they do to a war? The answer improbable, and American in origin, begins 8 years earlier, in a gray Connecticut workshop with an engineer who believed numbers could argue a nation out of disaster. If you were standing there on that runway in 1940, watching those 2 Spitfires rise into the sky, what would you be thinking? Tell me in the comments your name, where you're watching from, and what moment in history has always stayed with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. February 1932, East Hartford, Connecticut. The floor of the Hamilton Standard Test Bay is slick with oil, its smell heavy and metallic, the air vibrating with the thrum of an engine, turning something new, something many in the aviation world insist cannot work. Frank Walker, Caldwell, 43 years old, stands by the test stand with a clipboard in one hand and a calm that seems carved out of habit. He isn't one for drama. MIT trained meticulous to a fault, he believes in 2 things: numbers and the people who are willing to chase them past ridicule. Behind him, a prototype spins a 3-bladed aluminum propeller that can change its blade angle while rotating at over 2,000 revolutions per minute. The idea sounds insane to the old guard of the 1930s aviation world. Everyone knows wooden propellers are lighter, simpler, and good enough. Everyone knows mechanisms filled with oil and gears will seize in the cold, thin air, where engines freeze and pilots shiver. But Caldwell is done listening to everyone. 3 days earlier, a call came from Seattle. Boeing's pride, the Model 247, the sleek twin-engine airliner that was supposed to revolutionize civil flight, sat stranded in Denver. At 5,000 feet above sea level, the Rockies might as well have been the Himalayas. The plane could barely clear the passes. Its fixed-pitch wooden props worked beautifully in theory, and disastrously in reality. Juan Trippe of Pan American had given Boeing an ultimatum: fix it, or we buy from Douglas. Boeing called Hamilton standard. Boeing called Caldwell. He studies the blur of spinning aluminum jotting data, while the machine shudders the concrete floor. Each click of his pencil is a defiance of an industry certain he's wasting his career. Yet, for all the skepticism, there's a kind of electricity in the factory, that winter, a sense among the young engineers and machinists, that they might be standing at the hinge of history. To Caldwell, this isn't magic. It's mathematics in motion. His hydromatic design uses engine oil pressure to twist the blades, automatically fine pitch for takeoff, and climb coarse pitch for cruise. It's mechanical logic shaped in metal. But logic doesn't always win in a world ruled by reputation and fear of change. Outside, the Connecticut River freezes solid. Inside, a stubborn engineer keeps faith with a spinning blur of aluminum that might just rewrite the future of flight. The morning of February 15, 1933 dawned thin and pale over Boeing Field in Seattle. Wind rolled down from the Cascades cold enough to sting a man's teeth. On the tarmac waited a Boeing Model 247, America's most modern airliner, its silver fuselage gleaming like a promise. Test pilot Eddie Allen stood beside it, a calm figure in leather and wool, his reputation built on nerves of ice and judgment no one dared second-guess. Today, he'd be flying a version of the 247 that no one fully trusted, with Frank Caldwell's impossible variable pitch propellers mounted to its engines. In Denver, 2 weeks earlier, identical aircraft with fixed pitch props had stalled, gasped, and failed to climb over the Rockies. Now, the world of American aviation held its breath as Allen taxied out throttles forward and roared into the sky. Engineers, executives, and mechanics watched in silence, their hands in their coats, eyes, following the silver plane until it vanished into the low western clouds. Caldwell himself stood among them, expression unreadable, as if to show emotion would make the data less honest. Minutes passed, then a quarter hour. Somewhere above, the modified 247 was climbing past 6,000 feet, past the altitude where its predecessors had wheezed to a stop, then 810, 12,000. Allen leveled at 20,700 feet, the altimeter steady, the engine smooth. Over the Rockies, where every previous attempt had failed, this one flew steady and strong. When the telegram arrived that evening, it was almost poetic in its brevity. Constant speed propeller exceeds all performance claims. Recommend immediate adoption for entire United Fleet. Caldwell read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in his notebook. Around him, the East Hartford plant erupted in cheers. But he remained silent, the faintest smile tugging his lips. He knew this wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning of a race few yet saw coming. While America celebrated a new age of air travel across the Atlantic, dark banners unfurled in Berlin and Tokyo. The same innovation built for comfort and efficiency would soon become a weapon of survival. Caldwell, a man of equations and quiet conviction, couldn't have known it yet, but his propeller had just altered the balance of power in the skies. By November 1933, Frank Caldwell's name was carved into the brass of the Collier Trophy, aviation's highest honor. The citation praised his development of the controllable pitch propeller, a technology that promised to change not only how airplanes flew, but what they could do. That winter, President Franklin D. Roosevelt shook Caldwell's hand in the White House, calling his work an example of American ingenuity in motion. Cameras flashed applause filled the room, but beneath the noise, Caldwell's expression remained composed, almost detached. Recognition was welcome, but belief was another matter. Outside the ceremony halls, the voices of doubt hadn't quieted. At Wright Field in Ohio, Army test pilots called his invention too delicate for war. When oil pressure drops, one major warned, you'll have a 3,000-pound lawn dart instead of an airplane. The Army Air Corps labeled the system mechanically unsound. Even Charles Lindbergh, America's golden aviator, had told Caldwell privately that a variable pitch propeller was too clever for combat. To men raised on wooden blades and fixed angles, hydraulic complexity seemed like a trap. But Caldwell was not a man who argued. He measured. He turned his lab into a proving ground. With the precision of a watchmaker and the stamina of a soldier, he invented the whirl test, a stand-mounted setup that spun propellers at full engine speed for hours, even days, until parts screamed and failed. Every fracture, every deformation became a data point. His engineers called it Caldwell's torture rack. He called it truth. The more they tested, the clearer the truth became. His hydromatic system, governed by a tiny centrifugal regulator, no bigger than a coffee can, maintained constant RPM across every flight condition. If the plane climbed, the propeller automatically shifted to fine pitch for power. If it dove, it coarsened to prevent overspeed. And if an engine failed, the blades feathered flat to the wind, reducing drag, saving lives. It wasn't just engineering. It was a form of mechanical empathy, anticipating what the pilot needed before he even knew it. Still, in 1934, America being right wasn't enough. Caldwell's own company risked collapse if the military refused to believe him. In quiet moments, he would stare at the polished blades, gleaming under hangar lights, reflecting a man who trusted numbers over applause, but also knew that soon only a war could prove him right. Spring 1934. The chill still lingered over Michigan when two Boeing P-26 fighters lined up at Selfridge Field, their engines coughing to life under a pale sky. They looked identical, same airframe, same engine, same fuel, but one carried a secret that would define the future. On its nose spun Caldwell's constant-speed hydromatic propeller. The other wore the old fixed-pitch model, the kind that had powered American fighters since the Great War. From the control tower, observers watched as the two aircraft leapt from the runway in tandem. For a moment, they seemed even until the first 100 feet vanished, then the second. The constant-speed P-26 climbed like it had shed its own weight, pulling away with a grace that stunned even the most skeptical officers. At 10,000 feet, it was minutes ahead. At 15,000, it was gone. When they landed, the data spoke louder than any argument. The constant-speed fighter reached 10,000 feet in 5 minutes, 40 seconds, nearly 3 minutes faster than its twin, and topped out at over 200 mph. Lieutenant Colonel Carl Spaatz, future commander of U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, filed his report that night. The performance advantage is so significant, it represents a fundamental shift in combat capability. Any air force equipped with constant-speed propellers will hold decisive superiority over opponents who are not. For Caldwell, the numbers weren't triumph, they were vindication. Hamilton standards, factory lights burned through the night as orders poured in from the Army, Navy, and civilian airlines. In East Hartford, machinists worked triple shifts. Young engineers pinned performance graphs to the walls like battle maps. They knew they weren't just building propellers anymore, they were shaping the wings of a coming storm. Newspapers called it the propeller that thinks for the pilot. Aviation journals hailed it as the most important innovation since the monoplane wing. But to Caldwell, praise was merely a pause between problems. Each success raised the same question. What happens when this meets the real sky, when it meets ice, wind, and bullets? As 1934 drew to a close, the world itself seemed to be winding up like one of his test rigs. Nations, arming engines, roaring ambitions, accelerating toward a limit none could yet see. Across the Atlantic, darker clouds gathered over Europe. Caldwell's miracle of metal and oil was about to leave the laboratory and meet the chaos it had unknowingly been built for. By the late 1930s, the rest of the world was falling behind. In Augsburg, Germany, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the spear point of the Luftwaffe, still used a manually adjustable propeller. Every climb or dive demanded the pilot's hand on a lever, fine-tuning pitch, like a musician wrestling his instrument mid-battle. In Britain, the elegant Spitfire and rugged Hurricane relied on simple two-position propellers, one fine for takeoff, and climb one course for high-speed cruise, nothing in between. It was the mechanical equivalent of trying to fight a modern war with a sword that could only swing two ways. Caldwell saw the gap widening. At the 1938 Society of Automotive Engineers conference in Detroit, He presented a paper that should have been front-page news. His data showed constant speed propellers, improved climb rate by 35%, boosted service ceiling by more than 6,000 feet, and cut fuel consumption by 15%. The numbers were clear enough to shout, but few listened. German engineers like Ernst Heinkel scoffed that hydraulic systems are for automobiles, not combat. British manufacturers dismissed it as over-engineering. The myth of simplicity had become a kind of superstition. But while the skeptics clung to old certainties, Caldwell's design was already reshaping flight in quiet ways. United and TWA airliners crossed the continent faster than ever before. Navy scouts could stay aloft longer, climb higher. Yet, across the Atlantic, young RAF pilots were discovering what disbelief could cost. In the early months of the war, combat reports told a grim story. Over France and the Channel, Messerschmitts routinely outclimbed and outmaneuvered British fighters above 15,000 feet. Pilots wrote of watching German aircraft pull away, climbing into thin air, where the Merlin engines of their own Spitfires began to wheeze. "We can see them, but we can't reach them," one pilot wrote home. Inside Fighter Command, Air Marshal Hugh Dowding understood the implications. Altitude was everything. A fighter that climbed slower wasn't just late, it was dead. Yet bureaucracy moved at the pace of paperwork. Factories argued, committees studied, and the war clouds darkened. From his quiet Connecticut office, Caldwell read the reports. He was a civilian half a world away, but he knew exactly what they meant in the skies over Europe. The outcome of future battles was being measured not in bravery or strategy, but in revolutions per minute. Winter, 1939. The clang of metal echoed through Hamilton Standard's factory floors as the world outside edged closer to war. The hydromatic propeller, once a laboratory curiosity, had become a production nightmare of precision. Each unit required 47 machined components, gears, pistons, seals, all milled to tolerances thinner than a sheet of paper. 3 shifts ran around the clock but still demand outpaced supply. The Army Air Corps, the Navy, and now foreign orders from Britain all wanted Caldwell's creation. Yet success brought its own kind of peril. Then came the failures. A small batch of governors, those intricate devices that controlled oil pressure and blade pitch, malfunctioned during test flights. 3 propellers seized midair. 1 fighter spiraled down over right field before the pilot bailed out. The press smelled blood. Rival manufacturers, especially Curtiss-Wright, seized the moment to campaign against Hamilton Standard. Too complicated, they said, too risky. Pilots need simplicity, not science. The company's reputation trembled, and $12 million in military orders hung in the balance. Caldwell's reaction was not fury, but focus. For 6 sleepless weeks, he and a team of engineers lived in the factory, redesigning the governor system with redundant hydraulic lines and mechanical backups that could hold pitch even if oil pressure failed entirely. He personally signed off on every propeller that left the plant. His motto, spread among the workers like scripture. The numbers must not lie. But across the Atlantic, the numbers already told a story written in blood. In May 1940, the Luftwaffe swept across France. RAF Hurricanes and Spitfires, still using outdated 2-position props, struggled to climb in pursuit. Pilots fought bravely, but found themselves outpaced and outclimbed. Flight Lieutenant Douglas Bader, soon to be famous, wrote after one desperate mission, "They go up while we fade out. We fight gravity as much as the Germans." By June, the Luftwaffe's shadow reached the Channel. Fighter Command, bloodied and exhausted, braced for invasion. In a war now decided by altitude and seconds, Britain faced an invisible enemy, technological stagnation. And somewhere in those gray summer skies, Squadron Leader Desmond Cook of No. 65 Squadron realized that no amount of courage could overcome physics. The answer, he suspected, was already waiting, stamped, "Made in America." June 10, 1940. The sun had barely risen over RAF Hornchurch when Squadron Leader Desmond Cook laid the reconnaissance photos on the table. Airfields across northern France, blackened with German bombers, their escorts lined in neat rows of Messerschmitts. The invasion of Britain was no longer a rumor. It was preparation. Cook looked up from the photos jaw tight. He knew his Spitfires couldn't reach those altitudes fast enough. He had seen it at Dunkirk Germans, climbing away with ease, while British fighters clawed at the sky, powerless to follow. Mathematics had replaced pride. His Spitfire Mecha took 11 minutes to reach 20,000 feet. The Messerschmitt Bf-109E did it in under 9. 2 minutes, and change an eternity when the bombs were already falling. Cook had heard rumors of an American propeller that could change everything Hamilton Standard's constant speed design produced, under license by de Havilland in England. He didn't wait for orders. By afternoon, Cook was on the telephone with de Havilland's chief engineer, demanding immediate retrofit for his squadron, bypassing every layer of RAF bureaucracy. "Do it now," he said, "or we won't have a squadron left to ask." To their credit, de Havilland acted. Within 48 hours, emergency authorization came from Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding himself. Hangars at Hatfield lit up through the night as engineers worked 18-hour shifts, pulling old propellers off Spitfire noses, fitting the new hydraulic hubs, running pressure lines, calibrating governors by hand. Each conversion took 8 hours. On June 15th, Cook took off from Hatfield in Spitfire K9847, the first of its kind. The difference was immediate. The takeoff roll was short, the acceleration crisp, the Merlin engine humming in perfect balance. He climbed 5,000 feet 10:15, the new propeller automatically adjusting pitch as air thinned. At 20,000 feet, his stopwatch read 7 minutes 42 seconds, nearly 4 minutes faster than before. He kept climbing. 35,000. 38. Finally, 39,000 feet higher than any Spitfire he'd ever flown could reach. Cook descended, grinning, the white vapor from his breath still frosting his mask. He telephoned Fighter Command immediately. The Spitfire is now an airplane. Within 72 hours, all 12 aircraft of No. 65 Squadron were converted. The pilots' reactions were disbelief turned to exhilaration. "It's as if someone doubled the horsepower," Flight Lieutenant Brian Lane wrote in his diary. "For the first time, we can climb with the 109's altitude for altitude." As more squadrons followed, the rhythm of British skies changed. In hangars across the south, the sound of air compressors and oil pumps worked through the night, a chorus of urgency and hope. The Battle of Britain hadn't yet begun, but the weapon that could save it was already spinning to life. By late August 1940, the transformation was complete. Across England's patchwork of fighter bases, Biggin Hill, Tangmere, Hornchurch. The whine of takeoff was subtly different now. The new constant speed propellers gave the Merlin engine a steadier hum, deeper and smoother, like a song sung in tune for the first time. Of the RAF's frontline fighters, nearly 90% now carried de Havilland or Rotol versions of Caldwell's design. They looked the same on the ground, but in the sky the difference was nothing short of miraculous. The numbers told the truth first. Climb time to 20,000 feet fell by nearly 3 minutes. Service ceilings rose by 7,000 feet. Patrol range extended almost an hour. But statistics alone couldn't capture what it felt like for the pilots who lived the change. Before, many had fought their Spitfires as much as they fought the enemy, juggling throttle mixture and propeller pitch levers while trying to line up a shot. Now, with the propeller automatically optimizing itself, the engine sang without strain. For the first time, British pilots could focus entirely on the fight. The tactical consequences were immediate. German bomber formations expecting interception from below now found Spitfires diving from above with crushing energy advantage. Radar operators would scramble squadrons, and the fighters could be at combat altitude before the enemy crossed the coast. "We reached them 2 minutes sooner," one controller said, and that meant London was still standing. In his diary, Flight Lieutenant Brian Lane tried to explain what had changed. "It's not just power, it's freedom. The airplane feels alive now, like it wants to fight." From his office, Air Chief Marshal Dowding understood that those extra minutes and feet of altitude weren't abstract. They were the currency of survival. Every second saved climbing translated into cities, unbombed pilots, unburned children alive come morning. And while German engineers debated manual controls and mechanical purity, their pilots began to face an impossible truth: the RAF was no longer the underdog. The Battle of Britain had turned invisibly but decisively on 3 spinning blades of aluminum Frank Caldwell's impossible propeller. As September skies filled with contrails over Kent, the Merlin engine's new, confident roar became something more than a sound. It was the heartbeat of a nation refusing to fall. By 1942, the sound that once saved Britain now echoed across the world. The Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller, Caldwell's impossible design, had become the heartbeat of Allied air power. Every major American combat aircraft carried it: the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 Liberator, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the P-38 Lightning, and the sleek P-51 Mustang that would one day escort bombers all the way to Berlin. The same 3 blades that had lifted Desmond Cook's Spitfire over Kent were now carrying the weight of a global war. Hamilton Standard's East Hartford plant had grown from 800 workers to over 22,000, its lights burning without pause. Refrigerator companies, car plants, and typewriter factories retooled their machines to produce the precision parts Caldwell's design demanded. At peak, 12,000 complete propeller assemblies rolled out each month, each one a careful marriage of steel, aluminum, and oil that would decide whether a crew lived to see another dawn. But in war, even perfection stumbles. In October 1943 over Schweinfurt, a B-17 nicknamed Hell's Angels was hit by flak. The feathering mechanism failed, and the aircraft spiraled down, 9 men lost. Investigators traced it to contaminated hydraulic fluid that froze at 30,000 feet. Caldwell, now 54, flew to England himself. He sat with weary bomber crews in muddy Nissen huts, listening as they described engines, coughing governors locking the awful silence when a system failed. He took it personally. Back in Connecticut, he redesigned everything: redundant hydraulic circuits, backup mechanical locks, testing chambers that swung between -60 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, replicating the punishment of high-altitude combat. By 1944, propeller-related failures had dropped below 1% lower than any other aircraft system. The same feathering feature that had once betrayed Hell's Angels was now saving hundreds of bombers each month, keeping crippled aircraft aloft on 3, sometimes even 2 engines. When victory finally came, few outside the aviation world knew Frank Caldwell's name. He never sought fame. After the war, he returned to his quiet workshop in Connecticut. On his desk sat a small model propeller, the metal worn smooth where his thumb had rested over the years. Etched into the base were 5 simple words: nothing impossible, only unproven. History would remember radar, the Spitfire, the Enigma code. But for every pilot who lived to see the dawn, victory had also been written in revolutions per minute, in 3 spinning blades of aluminum designed by a man who believed that the right numbers in the right hands could change the fate of the world. You know, the more I revisit this story, the more it reminds me that history often turns not on grand speeches or heroic charges, but on quiet minds, stubborn hands, and ideas everyone else thought were impossible. Frank Caldwell didn't fight in the skies yet. His 3 spinning blades changed the course of a war. It's a reminder that innovation in the right moment can save nations just as surely as courage can. If you enjoy uncovering stories like this where invention meets destiny, consider subscribing. There's so much more history waiting just beneath the noise.